Welcome to this podcast to announce and celebrate the launch of the Society of Occupational Medicine's book, Why I Became an Occupational Physician and Other Occupational Health Stories. My name is John Hobson and I was the editor of Occupational Medicine, the journal of the Society of Occupational Medicine between 2002 and 2018. In this podcast I'm going to talk about how the book came into existence and some of the articles in the book. There will also be some extracts to give you a flavour of the book. Why I Became an Occupational Physician and Other Occupational Health Stories is a near-complete collection of all the filler articles that appeared in the journal Occupational Medicine whilst I was the editor. A filler article is essentially a short piece that fills an awkward white space at the end of a research paper. So how did the Occupational Medicine filler come about? I fell in love with medical journals and medical journalism as a medical student. Richard Smith was editor of the British Medical Journal, and I met him as a third year whilst at a medical student journalism event. I was in awe of what he did at the BMJ, and some of his ideas truly transformed medical practice throughout the world. I read the BMJ voraciously, but by far my favourite thing was the filler articles, and they even called them that. Here was an incredible insight into the human face of medicine, a relief from the p-values and confidence intervals and the scientific straitjacket of evidence-based medicine. Here were amazing tales and wonderful observations, brilliant writing, hilarious or sad, mind-bending and thought-provoking. The fillers were hidden away in the bowels of the journal or in unexpected places, but they made the journey from the front cover to the back an even more interesting one. Pleasant punctuations and all that research prose. When I became editor of Occupational Medicine in 2002, it didn't take long for me to realise that perhaps we could have fillers in our journal. Nerys Williams, one of the heroic band of assistant editors, was even more determined than I was to obliterate the white spaces at the end of research papers, and so our series of filler articles began. To begin with, the Occupational Medicine filler was mainly an article about why a doctor became an occupational physician, and perhaps the greatest achievement of this book is to collect all of these accounts in one place. It provides a unique record of why people enter a unique speciality. Together, they provide a fascinating insight into occupational medicine in this country and elsewhere over an extended period, a historical record of how the speciality has evolved. You can read about whether the why was a road to Damascus moment, or something that just happened, or an event that triggered a realisation that here was an area of medicine that provided something very different. My favourite remains the account by Bill Gunyon, and this has the honour of starting the book, but I will let Bill tell his own story.
I often wonder if perhaps it all really began on the 22nd of February 1953 on a hillside in Fife, close to RAF Lookers, from where a short time earlier my father, at the controls of a meteor jet, had taken off, never to return. Less than 4 months later, I entered the world. I don't recall as a child ever expressing a desire to be a pilot or being especially interested in flying. And as the time came closer to making a career decision, I felt somewhere deep down that I wanted to study medicine. Transferring schools for my final year, my new rector peered down his nose at me during our first meeting and with a sneer pointed out that I would be lucky to get into university, let alone medical school. So it was with unashamed haste that my unconditional offer from Dundee University was accepted. Freshers' Week introduced us to all the opportunities for engaging in anything but study, and here I came across the University Air Squadron. And suddenly, I knew I had to join and learn to fly. East Lowlands University's Air Squadron was clearly very gullible, and before I knew it, I was being taught to fly a chipmunk, from RAF Lookers no less. It quickly became clear that I did not possess my father's natural flying ability, but I do have the consolation of having flown solo. My newfound interest in flying led to an interest in all things to do with the RAF, which allowed me to convince a selection board that I was a good bet as a future RAF medical officer. Any pecuniary interest in improving the quality of my life at university was purely coincidental. Thus, for the second time, the RAF had a Gunyon on its list of officers, and I experienced the mix of primary care and occupational health from which the first spark of interest in occupational medicine was ignited. Responsibility for the health of those engaged in a diverse range of occupations during 3 tours of duty and operational flying stations, and yes, I did get to fly in the Lightning. A year's involvement with the rehabilitation of bandsmen of the 1st Battalion, the Royal Green Jackets, after the bombing in Regent's Park in 1982, and a chance encounter involving some alcohol and a discussion about the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries Diploma in Industrial Health fanned the flames of my interest in the specialty. And the rest, as they say, is history. Was my ultimate destiny just a series of unconnected coincidences? Was there something about flying inherent in my makeup designed to bring me into contact with the RAF and expose me to occupational health? Or was there some greater hand influencing and shaping my future? Who knows? I often wonder, though, if my father would have approved of my career choice. I hope he would.
Thank you, Bill. What a story, and there are plenty more fascinating personal accounts in this book. Over the years of my tenure as editor, we published more than 200 filler articles from more than 100 authors. These included extracts or items from the journal from 50 years beforehand, which were titled, not surprisingly, 50 years ago. They also included photographic articles on subjects as diverse as the Titanic, the centenary of the Health and Safety Laboratory, a hat factory in Stockport, and Charles Thackeray's grave. There was also a series of articles about the disastrous exploits of a fictional occupational physician called Kieran. These pieces are all in the book, along with a selection of some of the other filler articles the journal published. So what exactly is a filler article beyond a short article that fills a white space in a medical journal? Well, most of them were 500 words long, and we specified this, and as many authors will know, this rule was rigorously applied. The articles were not peer-reviewed in the scientific sense, but they were always reviewed by the editorial team, usually Neris. They were not necessarily scientific, but they could be. They were often, and at their best, just observations on life as an occupational health or allied professional. They were usually amusing, pertinent, questioning, unique, or all of those. They could include photographs, poems, song lyrics, pieces of art, or be historical. I like to think of them as interesting interludes in a sea of science. Along the way, we were incredibly fortunate to attract pieces from some brilliant writers, including, amongst others, Mike Gibson, John Challoner, Nerys Williams, and of course Professor Anthony Seaton. The next contribution in this podcast is narrated by Anthony. For those who don't know, Anthony is a chest physician and an environmental medicine academic. He wrote a dozen or so filler pieces for occupational medicine, each one a beautifully crafted gem of an insight into the world of occupational medicine, and recorded some of these pieces for the Occupational Medicine podcast. It is wonderful that we can include one of his pieces here. This is Those Two Impostors.
Two dates, 5th of August and 13th of October 2010, defined the 69 days between the disaster of the roof collapse in the San Jose copper mine in Chile and the triumph of the rescue of the 33 trapped miners. Watching the men coming one by one to the surface to be greeted by their families after an ordeal unimaginable to most of us, Kipling's words kept coming back to me. If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same. The men, young and old, met the disaster of near certainty of a slow death with remarkable equanimity, aided by their religious faith and inspired leadership. The rescue from entombment half a mile underground was a triumph of engineering and of disaster management by the Chilean authorities. Now the men have to face the problems of the triumph. Miners are hardy, self-reliant folk, following their fathers into the pit, as few other employment opportunities exist in their communities. These communities conceal a similar range of talent and intelligence to be found in any better educated group, including those who sit in Parliament, as witness their brass bands, choirs, rugby and political debates. I once met a Staffordshire miner who had taught himself Latin and Greek in order to read the classics in the original. But they differ from the rest of us in having to face risk of death every day they go to work. Before nationalisation, mine explosions and fires were commonplace in the UK, often killing hundreds of men. Even the communities share the hazard. In 1966, the collapse of a tip at Aberfan killed 144 people, including 116 school children. Poor nutrition, relative poverty, air pollution, and sometimes poor medical services lead to an unhealthy population at the mercy of economic forces out with their control. The triumph of the rescue in Copiapo conceals a sadder story of failure to control risk. 2 of the men were found to have silicosis. Presumably no health surveillance had been carried out. The men were being paid danger money in a mine notoriously liable to rock falls. Those 33 men rescued are matched each year by an average of 33 deaths in the Chilean copper mines, increasing as previously unsafe private mines reopen because of rising copper prices. It's well to remember to whom we owe our prosperity at a time when people are being put out of work. They are not those who speculate in money, but those who produce the necessities of modern life. Among these are the miners of Chile, who produce 1/3 of the world's copper, essential to communications, to construction, and even to brass bands. They'll never drink champagne in their yachts. Any day an accident could deprive them of their lives or their livelihood. And we are the consumers for whom they run these risks. We rely on them in good times and bad. Health and safety is not the joke some in the media take it to be.
You can read more of Anthony's fascinating short pieces in the book. Finally, I'm going to end this podcast with an introduction. I was delighted when Will Ponsonby agreed to write the introduction to the book. I've known Will for many years. We both trained at Birmingham, where Will says we drank lots of beer, but that's not something I remember very much about. Later, we worked together for the same occupational health business, where I had a hand in Will's training, although it often felt to be the other way round. Will has had a fascinating career in occupational medicine and has been a great president for the Society of Occupational Medicine, so I can think of nobody better to introduce the book. Over to you, Will.
Fillers is a love letter to occupational medicine, or rather a series of love letters with many different authors written over 50 years. Like many occupational physicians, I came into the specialty in mid-career and mostly by accident. I felt a little insecure about that. However, reading the series Why I Became an Occupational Physician, I realised that rather than being an outlier, my story was not untypical. I was actually part of the norm. This book reflects the diversity of occupational medicine. Professionals with many different backgrounds and experiences, all united by a love for their specialty. This eclectic mix of knowledge and experience allows us as occupational physicians to address the myriad of different issues that confront us on a daily basis. If we don't know the answer, we probably know somebody who will. In Fillers, I also learnt of doctors who went on to achieve in different areas of human endeavour, such as Che Guevara and Socrates, the Brazilian footballer. There are also stories about some of the greats of medicine, Manson, Thackara, Legg and Hunter. Their achievements and their paths were not always easy, but they persevered. Their work has had a major impact on the health of workers globally and often continues to do so. I can remember many of these articles when they were first published. I looked forward to the misadventures of Dr. Kieran and hoped I would avoid his pitfalls. I enjoyed reading the history of industry and medicine, not only in the UK but globally. Some of the issues faced by our colleagues 50 years ago demonstrate how much things have changed, and depressingly, sometimes how often they still challenge us. I find this book inspiring, informing and entertaining in equal measure. If I was reviewing for the journal, I would rate as buy, keep and read. Put it on your bedside table to give you some inspiration in the small hours.
I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and I hope you'll enjoy the book. It's been a long time in the making, but I'm sure you agree that it has been worthwhile. And if anyone ever wanted to understand what makes an occupational physician tick, they need look no further. Why I Became an Occupational Physician, the book, is published by Oxford University Press and is available at global.oup.com at 30% discount to Society members for £20.99 using the promotional code AMPROMD9.